So hi, welcome everyone. My name is Viktor, and this is a book launch of the social and cultural aspects of the circular economy towards solidarity and inclusivity. It was a great pleasure for me to edit it, and it was published last summer. Now we arrived to, I think, the most exciting part of this event. I would like to kindly ask authors to respond to these grand challenges that I'm proposing here. And we would take first Carlos, and then Iris, and then Luciana, and then Sabine's response. How your chapter contributes to the better understanding of the CE in general, and what are the major lessons of your chapter in that respect? This is my question, and I kindly ask the first speaker, Carlos, to respond.
Thank you, Victor. Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and contribute to this book, which I think it's very important. And I'll do my best to answer your question, considering there's been a gap since I wrote this. So yeah, I guess the way my chapter contributes to a better understanding of the circular economy is by placing the circular economy in urban food systems, and more specifically in the role of an urban food strategy in the development of a circular food system. So the way I attempt to show that was by focusing on the case of the English city of Brighton and Hove, where I'm based, which has a pioneering approach to transforming the vision of the city's food system by using collaboration between public, private and third sector through a food partnership. So I mapped those local initiatives embedded in the food strategy to 3 circular economy ambitions for the food system, which are to source food regeneratively and locally grown, make the most of food, and design and market healthier food products. Where does this come from? This comes from a report that came from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is an organization very prominent in advocating the circular economy. And it came from them because actually there is like you were mentioning, Victor, there isn't such a clear cohesion in the concept of the circular economy, and especially not in relation to food systems and food system transformation. There is very little literature around it. It's quite fragmented, and you mostly find approaches to this in practitioners. So I guess a major lesson was that people produce contrasting visions around the circular economy, and these are often influenced by worldviews on whether economic growth is blindly supported or contested, and that in turn reflects into different solutions being advocated in policy discourses. For example, more technocratic versus more agroecological and local solutions. Another kind of major lesson was that despite the transformational aspirations that we hear of the circular economy, in practice it seems to be a frame for optimizing resource cycling, and like we will discuss potentially, that has implications for transforming a food system that requires ecological integrity, social justice, and dedication to human health as well. So I think one conclusion of my chapter is that the circular economy, because of the momentum that has in the policy discourse, could give more visibility to all the socially driven food organizations that go around in a city that maybe before didn't have such a recognition as important actors in sustainability. And in turn, these organizations that operate within the so-called social and solidarity economy might add values of equity and inclusion or solidarity to the circular economy frame, which is often just focused on environmental and economic targets.
Thank you very much. Iris, please.
Yeah, also, thank you very much for having invited me to, I'm not sure if you invited me, but allowed me to contribute to this book, which this is a very important topic. So I think this is an important thing to have. I was attracted to this, or what I found interesting to that, and I hope other people find interesting too, is that the idea of the human waste is actually something that you would imagine would automatically be circular, because for the longest time of human history, when humans were just nomadic before agriculture, this was automatically part of you didn't talk about a circular economy, but of course it was part of the cycle in which humans moved around, and even later during agricultural times, for a long time this was just part of the way humans lived. And what I find interesting is that I can show in that chapter that it's actually modernity. It maybe in contrast to some other chapters where the circular economy may come up as a very, very new idea, something that breaks with the tradition of a more linear economy. In my chapter is actually the other way around, is that what starts out as a very circular concept or practice becomes linear through something that is often considered modernity. Part of that is urbanization, simply the growth in population, which puts distance between the place where most of the product, in this case, so is human waste, human excreta, are produced, in distance to the places where they can be used in agriculture. So it makes the process more complicated. But also because it puts more technology in between, again, the production and the use. And that creates something that could be circular in a number of problems to make it happen that this cycle is not interrupted. So in order for this to work, several stages have to all function, have to work together. One is the connection between the collection of the waste, which is the way it worked traditionally in many countries, especially in Asia, in China, and in Japan, but also in some parts of Europe. But with urbanization and with the sanitation movement, the idea was not to collect this waste, but to get it away from the home as fast as possible, as part of sanitation, as part of for health concerns. So that was the winning process of the flush toilets. But of course that then got rid of something that could be used again. Either it then ends up in the rivers. Often these rivers then get used for irrigation, which is a circular system of sorts, but of course it's very unregulated and often not safe. Otherwise, what you end up is something like sludge, which you get from the treatment plants, but this is then mixed with whatever else is in the rivers, and often those are the effluents of industrialization, of the industry that is situated often at the borders of the rivers, which means that something that was invented in order to make the processes or the management of human waste safer actually makes it less safe, because the sludge that you get is no longer safe to be used for agriculture. So it is a certain irony that comes up with that. And similar ironies come up at different parts of that cycle, which I go into more detail in the chapter. What I found interesting is that you don't usually think about human waste as part of the circular economy, and in some ways it is very different. It's, you don't have a special design, obviously, for that. It's not something that has to be reinvented in order to work. But it's also very similar because while the product itself doesn't get designed, the design of the process plays an important role, whether this can be reintroduced into the agricultural cycle. And it is part of an economy in the sense that humans, we all use resources and then transform it in some way to have a product, which in the end then is waste, and which we in some way need to be introduced into an economic cycle. And also it's a product that can be hazardous if it's not properly disposed of, just like any other economic product. But it can also be useful, and it gets traded. So I found that the similarities are actually much larger and more important than the differences from other parts in which the circular economy is more usually discussed.
Thank you very much. Luciana, please.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you very much. So my chapter, it's I analyze how, it's not analyze, I present an artwork called Double Standard. It's an artist that made it. It's called La Esmirra, and it was exhibited in the 32nd São Paulo Biennial. And this biennial, it's called as a more ecological biennial that we have here. So till there, now we have another more ecological. But the interesting of this artwork is because artwork is political way of showing some things. And in that time that was made, it is 2016. And we have political problems here in Brazil. Well, maybe we still have, but the question is, the indigenous people in Brazil always are marginalized. So this artwork shows how the way of construction of indigenous people and our civil constructions. So, and then when the artwork compares these two ways of building, the artist shows how the ways and how the world views are inherent in each one of those ways. So it's and then in my chapter I talked about this because the civil construction in Brazil, a problem in other parts of the world, but in Brazil is a very linear. The take, make, use, dispose, and pollute. It's and the take is very wasting way of doing that and consume lots of energy and water and natural resources. So it's very pollute and that a high footprints in the world. So when we look to the way of the indigenous people of Xingu, specifically the indigenous people of Xingu that I've talked to in my chapter, is a way of the construction with a harmony of nature, not only because that was possible, but they knew how to work with the natural materials around them. So nothing is used that is not necessary. There's no waste. There's no exceed. That's not, the aim is not to consume, but consume for use it. And so it's very interesting how the artists show this difference in different ways of thinking, ways of worldview. And then when I look at this artwork and I think about the circular economy practices, and I was thinking, oh, it looked like more indigenous way circular economy than the civil construction way of working. So I I think it is how we are related with the world, our surroundings, is the way that the indigenous people don't know circular economy, but they do that naturally because their cosmovisions is not different, because they understand the nature not as a object that they could explore, exploit, and use it the material, but they understand that it's a life, it's a live being. So it's different for understand to exploit it. And the main thing is it's a political way of to look at this different worldview. It's a political way of it's of positioning in the world. So it's the decision is not to the progress for what, for whom is good the progress. So the progress is of what, and this is political, because when you think only the progress, you are marginalizing these indigenous people because you think they don't have technology. And that's not true. They have a lot of technology. That's what I put this in my I try to write about it, because it's a technology that they understand about heating. They understand about how the heating protect the wood not to damage it and everything. So they have the technology that they need for their specifically made specific characteristics specific from this region. So it's something around this. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous.
Thank you, Luciana. Thank you very much. And Sabine, please.
Thanks, Viktor. Yeah, so Pia and my research is based around the background of global dynamics, such as the climate change, for example, leading to essentially societal restructuring where migration movements increase. And I think that's something we're going to see more often in the future. So we kind of looked at how when societies are restructured, these movements add to the existing challenges that already develop or kind of foster parallel discourses in terms of looking at economic growth, for example, social development and environmental protection within local contexts. And we try to investigate what's already being done to integrate people coming from different cultures, but also facing social disadvantages, and how we could then use the knowledge gained as a framework to develop a tool that would help other brands. And we primarily focused on brands or projects located in the fashion segment to enable them and encourage them to be more inclusive. So we investigated 5 projects in 4 different countries, which was super interesting for us because we had the opportunity to compare and see where there were similarities, or the projects were located in different cultural contexts already. And the investigations allowed us to really see how entrepreneurial projects were mainly driven by a personal, very, very individual passion to drive change within society. So all of our projects were either working with migrants or with socially disadvantaged people, often facing challenges such as a lack of municipal support, for example, facing challenges, the obvious ones like a language barrier, for example, but then others where, for example, people were experienced to work in different team structures. So having a having work handed over by a woman, for example, in some cases would pose a challenge to a specific team member, for example. Then they were facing challenges where, for example, they weren't allowed to pay their workforce as within a regular economy because of some sort of legal regulations. So the projects had to come up with their own type of currency to ensure that people were valued and acknowledged for the efforts they were undertaking. So the outcomes, the like basis of our interview outcomes really highlighted how the people running the projects were pushing above and beyond to ensure that people achieved the acknowledgement, that people were supported in understanding the bureaucracy of their new culture or new cultural environment they were moving into. And based on our findings, we developed something we call the Entrepreneurial Social Circular Business Toolbox, which kind of detaches the personal passion from the structures we identified to then allow people based in municipalities, people based in communities to look at how they can specifically with their individual local knowledge can contribute to making the lives of social entrepreneurs a little bit easier. And through this, allow the circular economy to be something that's really inclusive and not just looking at the environmental, or as Carlos said, environmental and economic spheres, but really embrace the multiculturality within our communities.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask our authors to dig a little bit deeper into their research chapters and perhaps go into select specificities. So in this second round, I would kindly ask you to mention interesting or perhaps controversial, surprising, unexpected aspects of your paper's research and analysis, and especially with its relevance to contributing to the CE and SSE discourses. Carlos, please.
I mentioned before that I identified contrasting visions around the circular economy and food through, I interviewed 22 stakeholders in the Brighton Hove City region food system. And one of these narratives was, no surprise, about zero waste, kind of reproducing the discourse that went from the origins of the concept in industrial ecology to the more zero waste mainstream discourses now, and where the circular economy serves more of a waste management framework. And then on the other side, it was quite clear that a lot of people identified, even if they didn't necessarily understand what the circular economy was, they identified as a solution against the problems of the global economy. So they considered that even the expenditure within the local economy, that was considered the circularity. So yeah, those were two narratives that I identified. And I think within the environmental movement and food, there's always a push for localization of resources. And I argue that it's not, we should be careful with just emphasizing the environmental benefits of localization, because there have been cases, for example, in the United States, where the local markets can increase social injustices. But the case for localization does matter in, let's say, adopting circular practices, where at community level, social practices can start changing and fostering resilience around food, helping communities to provide food for themselves, building community capacity, and so on. So I argue that these kind of forms of civic and social innovations in cities in the form of community food projects are very important for transforming the urban food system, and I think that they should play a more key role in circular economy discourses to do with food particularly. Yeah, so I guess one surprising thing, if I can call it surprising, was that because of the focus in resource optimization of the circular economy, when it comes to food, there has been a big link between the circular economy frame and advocating for the environmental benefits of surplus food redistribution. And that has coincided with, for example, in the UK, in a rise of need of emergency food. So it's often advocated in national discourses as a win-win. The more you redistribute surplus food, you fight against food waste and against food poverty. But I argue that the circular economy in this kind of frame can institutionalize emergency food, and it supports the status quo of the linear economy, which is the one that has produced waste in the first place. So this kind of frame does not question how waste is produced and maintained in a global food system that is supported by neoliberal institutions.
Thank you. Iris, please.
Yes, what struck me actually as I was working that, and I hadn't expected that, was the immense, I found, the immense mismatch between, on the one hand, both the enormity of the issue. I mean, it's a taboo. That's why we don't often think about this, or at least I hadn't. We have more than 7 billion people now, going on 8, and they all urinate and defecate every day. And it's just a lot of material. And it's something that's been part of the human nature in the truest sense of the word, as long as there have been humans. So on the one hand, the size and the length of the challenge, and on the other hand, how little we know about this. I mean, there is not that much research, you would think, and that this is far from being solved. I grew up in a developed country. To my mind, it had always been that, okay, you go in a toilet and we have toilets and that's it. And that's what everybody will end up with in the end. Working on this paper, or on the whole research, opened my mind to that this is not true for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, there is no way that the entire world can have this type of toilet, because it requires a lot of water, which many parts of the world simply don't have. It requires a very expensive infrastructure, for which also many countries in the world don't have the type of money. But also, it's, even if it was possible, it's not necessarily desirable, because it transforms something that could be used as fertilizer and has been used as fertilizer for millennia into something that is too toxic that we actually incinerate it in large parts of Europe now. So there's a certain absurdity to this, that we now turn this into hazardous waste, which, I mean, it depends. It's not the same everywhere, but in parts of the developed world, and specifically in those parts that have very high environmental standards, which you would think is a good thing, but that means that the sludge that you get from water treatment plants is considered too toxic to be suitable for use on the fields in agriculture. So we actually end up burning it and get toxic emissions from that. So it's the whole absurdity that comes with this process, yeah, I was struck with that. And also, we don't, as I said, we know very little about how much is actually recycled in the entire world. We know much more about many other materials. I had a hard time finding any type of data on that. Those what I found was anything between 15 and 50% that gets recycled. That's less than a whole number of minerals. I mean, aluminum is between 60 and 70%. So more aluminum gets recycled than our own excreta. I found that also, striking. So yeah, that was my learning experience when working on this chapter.
Thank you very much. Luciana, please.
Well, I think in my chapter, I choose this artwork, Double Standard, for this title in Portuguese, Dois Pesos, Duas Medidas. This meaning of this is that you are selling something that but it's not so it's manners of comparing things that could not compare. So you're selling something that with not the same base of comparison. So when the artist choose this title for this artwork, it's interesting to think, because this is a manner of political, how the political things are working here. So with our Western civilization and with the indigenous peoples societies. So it's all the chapter I try to show that the indigenous people are so technology and have the basis that could help the Western civilizations understand how to relate it with the nature and our environment. And I asked permission to read just a quote by Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, is an anthropologist, that I think it's very nice. And it's called, he was talking about the indigenous societies, and he said, they are masters of the techno-primitivism, bricolage, and the political metaphysical metamorphosis. They are talking about the American collectives, okay, are actually one of the possible changes of the future subsistence. So I think with this phrase, they're thinking that we have to look at. So I think the circular economy is close to this worldviews. So because it's not to return the primitive ways of living, because they are not living in a primitive way. So we have to look at them as a good yes, the way that we can live in the sustainability with this word. So it's not to marginalize and so that's the important thing. So all the paper, I try to prove that we have to look in other cosmos visions, other ways. It's not only the Western civilization that it's possible. No, there's other possibilities that we can learn with them, and that they are so important too. In equalitarian, specifically for social solidarity economy, the way that indigenous people lived it, no hierarchical and an egalitarian society, it's very interesting way that we have to learn to. I think so. So, and this is the same aim that the artwork do with us. So it's what I try to, or that's my intention with all this chapter.
Thank you very much. And Sabine, please.
Yes, thank you. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we had like very surprising moments, but one thing that was really clear, and I mentioned this earlier, was the belief and the vision people who led the project had. And like when we did our interviews, it took them 2 sentences and you could clearly see how they burst into, yes, we want to do this, we need to tackle this. And we kind of recognized that this belief and their vision was the main driver to connect the circular economy with tackling social injustice and disadvantage, because for them, no matter what kind of products they would have developed, developing a sustainable product, whatever that might mean in a concrete definition, wouldn't never be enough. So they were always looking for something that had more value, to then develop business practices that would provide problem solutions. And they were very interested in just interweaving their value and vision into not only their lives, but also transferring this kind of approach to the participants as well. And one of the biggest benefits, I guess, they all mentioned was that it was a two-way learning experience, and the project leaders learned as much about their team as the team learned from the project leaders. And whilst this slightly differed from project to project, they in general really stated that this was something that kept them going as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say we had like surprising moments, but it really was clear how much the individual contributed to the existence of those projects. Hence why we then looked into how we could make lives easier for people where maybe the circular economy focus is an environmental or economical focus, and they don't necessarily see a benefit for themselves in being socially more inclusive or embracing multiculturality as something that can be beneficial for a community or our society.
When I started researching into circular economy, I started with skepticism, because I think it's a term that has gained a lot of attention very quickly, and I think no one seems to understand very well what it means for the world to have a circular economy. And I also think it's a very global north perspective. I think Luciana said very well that indigenous people have been doing what we could consider circular economy practices for, since ancestral times, but we are only now paying attention to that, and if we are able to label it as circular economy. And I think, from my view, it's only those activities that can be labeled as circular economy that go through the filter and become successful. And they tend to be activities that are for profit and that drive economic growth. And why I'm saying that is because a lot of activities I've identified, they didn't necessarily classify or consider themselves, they were not part of the circular economy movement, precisely because they were voluntary and they were forms of social civic innovations.
Yeah, maybe just as an aside, it's in the global north, it's not that long ago that our lives were not that different from today's indigenous people. I mean, and it's fairly recent. I mean, just with industrialization, that large part of our economy are not circular. And even then, so I think I'm a historian, so I tend to be aware of that what we're talking about and thinking about as the norm is actually anything but the norm. So, and one of the things that is standing in the way of having a more circular system today is is, I think that it is tied to scarcity, because for most of human history, people used what they had, again, not because of environmental concerns or because they thought it was the ethical thing to do, but because they were poor, because it was the thing to do. And this is true for my specific topic, so human waste, because it's actually, at least in parts of the world, it's become more difficult and actually also more expensive to collect and then test to make sure that it is a high quality fertilizer product and a safe product, using our own excreta than buying artificial fertilizer. So it's actually more complicated. And this will change very much in the moment that other fertilizer becomes more expensive, and there is a natural and inbuilt incentive to use, what we produce, and that is very much the same, I think, with other products as well. And I think that is something that makes it quite difficult to do, because it's sometimes we don't want our societies to become poorer. It's not something that we want to have. We don't necessarily, even people who don't necessarily believe that economic growth is always a good thing, even people who have a critical attitudes to that, wouldn't necessarily translate that into thinking, well, we should all become poorer again. So how to get the incentive that comes naturally when you use something again because you have to, I think that is something that's not so easily solved.
Wow, I was thinking how my brain is running so high. Yes, wow. One thing is the concept of sufficiency, how we live with sufficiency. What is sufficiency for me, or what is sufficiency for another one and another one? So when we think about consumerism, we think, why I have to the next cell phone, the next type of cell phone, why this is so necessary? This is really necessary, or I can go slowly, or I can go rethink that really is necessary. This, when I talk this, I remember one phrase, one speech of Vandana Shiva, and she was talking about some, I don't know, some publication that say that in India, there's the poorest people in that region. I don't know, I cannot remember the details, but they are saying that because the people there live only with $2 a day. So they are the poorest region. So, and Vandana Shiva said no, that she was contexted that because she said the way that they lived in community, all they produce their own clothes, they produce their own food, and they use the permaculture way of in their constructions. So they don't need money because they can do everything that they need with that. So the $2 and then even just make a joke, oh, it's only to buy a Pepsi, and that's not important for them. So she was, of course, this is a joke, but what is important to live? What we need, really need, what is comfort? This is very important to discuss, because we really need that. So okay, I will talk another, sorry, I take time, but I talk about my kid, my son. He asked to my grandmother, oh, grandma, do you like ice cream when you are a kid? And my grandmother said, oh, I don't have ice cream when I was kid. There's no refrigerator when I was kid. So my boy said, oh, that's awful. You don't need you don't need ice cream when you are a kid. So it's very funny, but she didn't need to eat ice cream, but for my son, it's important for her. How this is possible to live a childhood without eating ice cream? So sorry for talking about these things, but I think this is very important to think that 100 years before, my grandmother has a healthy childhood without ice cream. So what is important for us today in this millennium, in this century, what we need for, what is the sufficiency that we need? And that's what I think that the circular economy could help us. What we really need to think that's important too.
So I think for the fashion industry, it's just, I think the challenges the fashion industry has are just so complex that embedding the circular economy across the global supply chains is something very difficult, partly because the supply chains are really entangled, and often we don't really know who contributes to what kind of part, which then already leads me to the second biggest challenge, that's the lack of transparency. So if we don't really know who does what and how we kind of deal with all the environmental and social issues, how on earth are we, or shall we kind of find solutions for these complex problems? And then what I think is touching upon what Luciana said about the needs, we have the consumer group, which is kind of part of the constant blame game, who's the first to make a move towards change, whether it's the industry that needs to change or whether that's the consumers that by demand change the industry. And if we don't stop playing this game and developing products that really allow for material flows and regeneration, then we won't get anywhere. So I think the fashion industry as such is very complex and very wicked to just come up with a quick solution.
Thank you for your responses. It was absolutely a pleasure to work on this project. I just loved it, tip to toe. It was really a humbling learning experience for me too, to be able to collaborate with you.